Welcome to Truelty Setup Guide. In today's training, I'm going to walk you through the full setup of Truelty from beginning to end, including the setup on the Snowflake side, as well as putting tables into the LZ and configuring the Truelty UI. So we're going to start here, and what I've done is I've received the files. There are 3 setup files with SQL that I've placed into these 3 worksheets: Setup 1, Setup 2, and Setup 3. And these are based on the 3 setup files that you'll receive from Truelty. So with our first setup file, there are a couple things we need to add and configure. So if you look here on the screen, we're going to scroll down here to line 19, and you'll see this section right here that says Add Username. What this is doing is, as we create our role called Truelty SVC, or service account, or service role, we're going to want to be able to grant that to an administrator user or a role. In this case, we'll put in an administrator user. And in our test account here, this administrator user is me_admin. So I'm going to add that in there so I can access the Truelty service role if I need to do any type of changes or etc. So it's going to have access to that. Now, let's go down to one other spot. So if we come down here, we're going to create 2 user accounts. One of them is the service user account, which we'll use in the Python, and the other one is the Truelty UI user account. We need to add passwords for both of those accounts. So simply just come up here and we'll just change this, and we'll call this one at Truelty 23 SVC. You can put anything you want. I'm going to use these ones, and we'll do this one. We'll call it at LTY 23 UI. Okay, once we've done that, then we can go ahead and process and run this entire set. So what I'm going to do is select everything in here, and I'm just going to hit run. And that's going to go through, and it's going to create our Truelty database, our Truelty schemas. It's going to apply the access control to those, and that should be done here fairly quick. Now, one of the things that we do, and this makes it so it's fairly easy to manage, is there are a series of schemas that we use. One of them that is important to understand is the LZ schema. That's where you will place your tables to be processed. In that schema, we do use future grants. So as long as you have access to that schema, you can place things in there, and it will automatically manage the correct ownership of those tables so that you don't have any access control issues. Okay, those are now created, and we've got the basic structure in that place. Now we're going to go to Setup 2. And in Setup 2, we're going to put in place some tables, some views, and some stored procedures, and some other things there. And so just like before, we're just going to select everything in here and go ahead and run that. And so this will get all of our core tables, our views, stored procedures, some sequences, things like that created. All right, now that that one's done, we'll go to Setup 3. And we're going to select everything in Setup 3, and again, just run that. All right, now that we're done with that, we're going to go to this last one that I created, and basically all we're doing in here, I can get hold of this, I've got some tables that I already created, and I have this in a different database and schema, and I'm just going to clone those into our Truelty LZ schema for us to use, so you can kind of see how to add tables in and how to configure them in the UI. And so I'm going to just load those in there using this script. So I'm just going to select this whole thing, and we're just going to run that. Great. Now that we've ran that and we've processed that, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to the UI and configure our setup and these tables. Now we're in the UI. We've come to the app. You will have received from Truelty a email inviting you to access the UI console. Accept that email. That'll have you create a password for the email address that you provided. And then once you've done that, then we're going to be here at the login screen. And we're going to go ahead and log in with our email and the password we created. Now, when we come into Truelty, you'll notice that the very first time we come into the dashboard screen, everything's -1 and 0, and that's because we haven't configured anything, we haven't set up anything, and we haven't processed anything. So we're going to go and we're going to add those tables that we created. So we're going to go to Sources, okay, and you see everything's blank here. We're going to hit Add Tables. And in doing so, what that's going to do is it's going to go out, look at the tables that we added, and identify those. And you'll see it comes back, and it wants to know some information. So everything in dark purple is information that we can populate to explain how we're going to run things. Now we can take our table names and we can give them friendly names. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to call this Central Customer, E4 if I can spell, and I'm going to call this East CUST, and I'm going to call this, I'm just going to leave this, and I'm not even going to put a name in there because I want to show you that, and I'm going to just call this South. All right, so we can come in there and make whatever names we want there. Then we're going to decide how we're loading. I would recommend that you use updates, and there's a other training that'll go into more details about the difference between inserts and updates, but for this one we just want to show a quick walkthrough on the setup. So I'm going to set all these to update. Then I'm going to select 3 of these to be active. You'll notice that when you bring in a new table, you'll need to set it either as active or inactive. I'm going to set this one to inactive. Okay, so I've got 3 tables as active, 1 table that's inactive. And then we're going to go ahead and hit the Save button over here. And that's going to go ahead and make our changes, and then we're good to go. Now, once we've set up our tables, then we're going to go ahead and go to our columns, and we're going to map our columns. Now, you'll notice that when I came in here, a couple things. I've got the 3 tables that I said were active. If we just quickly go back to here on our sources, just to drive this point home, notice that this table right here, we did not set as active. And so because of that, when we come to our columns to configure them, it's not going to show up. Now you'll also notice that there's a little yellow thing here, or yellow ball there, and that's indicating that something is either new or changed in these tables. And so when we click on one of these to edit it, it is going to go through a process of evaluating that table, and it's going to use Snowflake's ability to look at columns and identify any types of semantic categories that are core identifiers. Now you'll notice that I created some names some aliases, and then one of them I didn't put an alias on it. You'll notice that when I don't put an alias on it, it just gives me the full path and name of the table. So if you want to have alias names, you can. If you don't, it'll automatically put the full path. And if you have created alias names, you'll be able to put your mouse over it and get a float over of the full path. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click on this. And what you're going to see here is it's going to say, all right, I'm doing a process of analyzing these tables. Now, depending on the size of your table, both in number of records as well as number of columns, this can take a little bit of time because it's doing a fairly extensive review of the data. All right, so it's finished up, and you see that it went from yellow, saying that we haven't analyzed the table, to green. So now we're going to go into here in each table, and we're going to map it. Now you'll notice that many of these are already mapped, and that's what the process that just ran did. However, you'll see some here that say map categories, and those are ones that we need to still map. Now, the critical thing, and we've talked about this in other videos, but for every table, we need to make sure we identify what is the primary key column. And in my tables, I call that primary key column, and that is a primary key that's unique for each record. In my tables, I call it source ID. And so I'm going to map that to our source ID or source unique ID column. And every table's got to have one of these to process. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And you'll notice when I added it, it puts it up over here on the identifier. It says, hey, that's what it is. Now, these other ones, I'm not going to use those columns, so I'm going to set those to do not use. And so these ones I am going to just set to do not use. And then once I'm done, I'm just going to hit save, and that will save that. And once it's done saving, it's going to say, all right, all's good. And I'm just going to do that for these other ones really quick. You'll notice when I click on a table that has not been mapped, you're going to see some details up here. It's going to tell me that 4 columns still need to be mapped and that we're still requiring the source unique ID in this table. So just like my other table, my source ID column happens to also be my source unique ID. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly map those. All right, now we've got all of our tables configured, good to go. And we're going to do our last thing in our UI, and that is a pre-check, which is going to validate our tables to see if there's any issues with them. So I'm going to go ahead and run the pre-check. And again, depending on the size of your tables, these can be either, this process could take a few minutes to run a full pre-check because it's evaluating and making sure that there are no duplicate records or that there are no nulls. So that's part of the process that's running. All right. Now it's come back. It's identified the tables that we have selected. We can see that we've got the 3 tables that we've identified, and we are good to go. So now let's go ahead and we're going to bring up the Python side of this and actually run it. All right. So now we've configured our setup in the UI, and now we're going to come to the Python portion and go ahead and run that. We'll use our environment variables that we've set up to identify our user and account and password to Snowflake. And so we're just going to use the command line, which we can run manually, or we can simply schedule. And this is the command line. Now, in our other videos, you'll see that I created a Truelty folder in the location that we were running it, and I put the Truelty py file in that Truelty, and then I'm just running Python and calling the Truelty.py app with the command line of -c env, which says use the environment variables we set up. We're running for the Truelty process, and we're pointing to where the Truelty database and data store schema is. And so we'll go ahead and just run that, and that should launch our process. Now, once it starts, you're going to see how it connected and all the details, the Python connector, etc. If you want to watch this in real time in the history, you'll want to copy that session ID there to be able to give that to Snowflake. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do to be able to show that is I'm going to come to our historical table here, and we're going to watch this by session. Now, I'm just going to put my new session ID in there, and you'll see that this is now running. So now you'll see it's processing the jobs. It says that we had 3 tables that we identified to be matched. And so it's going through those. It's analyzing the semantic categories that met our criteria. So it said I had 4 semantic category types that it wanted to analyze. So it's processing those. So now that we've sliced our data into the semantic categories, it's generating the code to do the pair matching, and that will create code for everything to run in parallel. It goes through a process of load balancing the code so that it can run equitably across all the active processes. All right, now it found it as it's built out the code, there's 85 jobs to run. It's going to run those. All right, now that it's done running all the code, it's doing the final chaining. And once the chaining is done, then we will write the results out to the tables. So now that we're done, we're going to go ahead and come back to our dashboard, and we're just going to come back to the dashboard, and we're just going to hit refresh here so that it updates that dashboard. And we're going to see the 3 tables that we chose to run. And so you can see the ones that, what the results were for those. We had a 39% match overall, duplication. It took 3 minutes to run, and we ran 25 million records, and it took 0.93 credits, and then here are the 3 tables we ran. And if you remember, when we came back to sources, we had the 4 tables, but we had set one to be inactive. And so, of course, that table did not run. And we obviously, in our results here, we don't see that that one processed, but the other 3 did. Thank you for watching this full install. And if you've got any questions, please reach out to us.